I never believed in signs from the universe until the night Dylan walked into the emergency room humming Claire de Lune. Not the whole thing, obviously. Just that one haunting phrase that loops in your head when you can't shake a melody. The same phrase that had been playing in the hospital cafeteria 6 months earlier when I'd spilled coffee all over my scrubs and he'd handed me a stack of napkins without saying a word. I'm Mason, by the way. 28, cardiac nurse, chronically single, and apparently the kind of person who remembers obscure classical music moments with strangers. My best friend Jenna says I overthink everything, which is probably true, but when you work 12-hour shifts in a place where people's hearts literally stop beating, you learn to pay attention to the small things. The details matter. That first encounter in the cafeteria was nothing special. I mean, I noticed him, sure. Hard not to notice someone who looks like they walked out of a cologne commercial wearing surgical scrubs. Dark hair, strong jawline, these incredibly focused eyes that seem to take in everything at once. He worked in radiology, I learned later, which explained why our paths never crossed on the floors. He handed me those napkins, our fingers brushed for maybe half a second, and he gave me this small smile before walking away. I remember thinking his eyes were kind. That's the word that came to mind. Kind. I didn't see him again for months. The hospital employed over 2,000 people, and our departments existed in completely different orbits. I forgot about him, mostly. Except, sometimes when I heard Claire de Lune, I'd remember that brief moment, the warmth of his hand, the way he'd smiled like he understood that spilling coffee was just another Tuesday in the life of a hospital worker. Then, the schedule changed. Our hospital implemented a new overnight crisis response team, pairing cardiac nurses with radiology techs for emergency situations. The idea was to have imaging specialists on hand for rapid diagnostics during critical cases. I got assigned to Thursday and Saturday overnights, midnight to 8 a.m, and when I walked into the staff room for my first shift, there he was, Dylan. His name tag said Dylan Hayes. He was setting up his bag in the locker next to mine, and when he turned around and saw me, recognition flashed across his face immediately. "Coffee guy," he said, and smiled that same small smile. "Napkin guy," I replied, trying to sound casual, even though my heart had done this weird skip thing. "Mason." "Dylan. Looks like we're partners." The first few shifts were professional, cordial. We responded to codes, rushed patients to imaging, coordinated with doctors. Dylan was efficient, calm under pressure, the kind of person you want next to you when someone's life hangs in the balance. During downtime, we'd sit in the small break room, and I learned he drank his coffee black, always brought his own food because he didn't trust hospital vending machines, and had this habit of tapping his pen against his thigh when he was thinking. He asked me questions too. What made me choose cardiac care? Whether I'd always wanted to be a nurse, if I had family in the area. Normal co-worker small talk, except it didn't feel small. Dylan had this way of listening, really listening, where he'd lean forward slightly and give you his complete attention. In a world of people constantly checking their phones or waiting for their turn to talk, being truly heard felt radical. It was our third shift together when I noticed he hummed while working. We were alone in the imaging suite, prepping for a patient transfer, and I heard it. That phrase from Claire de Lune. Just a few bars, barely audible, like he didn't even realize he was doing it. I froze. My hands went still on the gurney I was adjusting. "You're humming?" I said. He looked up, startled. "What?" "That song. You're humming it." A slight flush crept up his neck. "Sorry, bad habit, I'll stop." "No, it's just... That's the song that was playing when we met, in the cafeteria." His eyes widened slightly. "You remember that?" "Yeah, I remember." Something shifted in the air between us. Not dramatically, not like in movies where orchestras swell and time stops. Just this quiet acknowledgement that we'd both held onto the same small moment, that it had mattered enough to stick. "I remember too," Dylan said softly. "You looked stressed, like you were having the kind of day where spilled coffee was just the latest disaster." "I was, and you appeared with napkins like some kind of cafeteria angel." He laughed, and I realised I'd never heard him really laugh before. It was warm and genuine and made something in my chest feel lighter. After that, our conversations went deeper. Dylan told me about growing up in Oregon, about his mum who taught piano, which explained his love of classical music, about moving here for work 3 years ago and still not quite feeling settled. I told him about my family in Texas about choosing nursing after my grandfather's heart attack, about how I'd come out to my parents at 22, and how they'd struggled at first but eventually came around. That last part just slipped out one night around 3 a.m. when exhaustion makes you honest. We were sitting in the break room, both of us running on our fourth cup of coffee, and I was telling him about my sister's upcoming wedding. "My mum keeps asking if I'm bringing anyone," I said. "She means well, but every time she asks, I can hear this hope in her voice that I'll finally introduce her to a nice guy and settle down." I hadn't meant to say guy. It just came out naturally because I was tired and comfortable and not thinking about filtering myself. I tensed, waiting for the shift in energy that sometimes happened when people learned this about me. Dylan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My mum does the same thing. She's convinced I work too much to meet anyone. She's probably right." The way he said it, casual but deliberate, felt like an answer to a question I hadn't quite asked. I looked at him, and he looked back, and there was this moment of mutual understanding, of recognition. "Does she know?" I asked carefully. "Your mum, that you're looking for a guy?" "Yeah, she knows. She's been great about it, actually. Sends me articles about gay couples getting married in ridiculous destinations, like she's planning my wedding before I've even been on a date." I laughed, relief flooding through me. Mums are universal, apparently. After that, everything felt easier. Not forced or loaded with meaning, just comfortable. We started texting between shifts. Nothing profound, just stupid memes about hospital life, complaints about difficult doctors, random observations. Dylan sent me a photo once of a vending machine that had eaten his dollar, captioned, "This is a hate crime." I sent back a picture of my hospital cafeteria's mystery meat, captioned, "Pretty sure this violates the Geneva Convention." But there were other texts too, late-night messages when neither of us could sleep. Dylan telling me about a patient who'd thanked him for holding her hand during a scary procedure. Me confessing how I sometimes cried in my car after losing someone. The kind of honesty you share when darkness and distance make it safe to be vulnerable. I started looking forward to our shifts with an intensity that should have worried me. I'd check the schedule obsessively, counting days until Thursday. I'd think about things I wanted to tell Dylan, storing up stories and observations like gifts. Jenna noticed, obviously, because she noticed everything. "You're talking about your work partner a lot," she said over drinks one evening. "He's my friend. We work together." "Uh-huh. And does this friend have a name?" "Dylan." "And is Dylan single?" I took a long drink of my beer. "I don't know. We don't talk about that. But you want to know." I did. God, I did. But wanting to know felt dangerous. Dylan and I had built this easy friendship, this partnership that worked. We trusted each other in high-pressure situations. What if I ruined that by wanting more? What if I was reading everything wrong? The problem was I was starting to notice things I couldn't unnotice. The way Dylan's scrub top stretched across his shoulders when he reached for supplies. The small scar above his left eyebrow that I wanted to trace with my finger. How his voice got softer and rougher when he was tired. The way he'd brush against me in tight spaces and I'd feel that contact like electricity. One night, around 2 a.m, we got called to a code. 70-year-old man, massive heart attack, barely hanging on. We worked for 90 minutes, Dylan running between imaging and the cardiac bay, me doing compressions until my arms screamed, everyone fighting to pull this man back from the edge. We lost him. Despite everything we did, his heart just gave out. It never gets easier. Every loss feels personal, feels like failure even when you know you did everything right. I stood outside the room after we called it, staring at nothing, trying to hold myself together. Dylan found me in the stairwell 10 minutes later. I was sitting on the steps, head in my hands, trying not to cry. He didn't say anything, just sat down next to me, close enough that our shoulders touched, and stayed there. After a while, he started humming. Clair de Lune, again. So soft I almost couldn't hear it. "Why that song?" I asked, my voice rough. My mum used to play it when I was upset. She said Debussy wrote it to capture moonlight, to show how something can be beautiful and melancholy at the same time. I don't know. It helps, somehow. I turned to look at him. He was staring straight ahead, his profile outlined in the harsh stairwell lighting. Strong nose, full lips, that jawline I'd memorized without meaning to. He looked tired and sad and beautiful. "Thank you," I said, "for sitting with me." "Always," he replied, and something in the way he said it made my heart ache. His hand was resting on his knee. I watched it. This hand I'd seen do so many things: adjust equipment, comfort patients, hold coffee cups, tap against his thigh when he was thinking. I wanted to reach out and take it, wanted to lace our fingers together and feel his warmth, wanted to be brave enough to close the 6 inches between us and rest my head on his shoulder. Instead, I stood up. We should get back. Dylan nodded, but he looked at me for a long moment before standing, like he was trying to figure something out, like maybe he'd been hoping I'd do something different. The next few shifts were strange. Not bad exactly, but charged with something unspoken. We'd reach for the same supply and our hands would touch, and the contact would linger half a second too long. Dylan would explain imaging results and stand close enough that I could smell his soap, something clean and cedar-scented. I'd catch him looking at me sometimes, and when our eyes met, neither of us would look away immediately. It was Jenna who finally forced the issue. She called me on a Wednesday night, the evening before my next shift with Dylan. "Okay, I can't take this anymore," she announced. "You're clearly into this guy. He's clearly into you. Someone needs to make a move." "You don't know that he's into me." "Mason, I've heard you describe in detail how this man looks at you, how he finds excuses to touch you, how he shares his deepest feelings at 3 a.m. He's into you. But what if I'm wrong? What if I ruin our friendship? What if you're right? What if you're both sitting around pining for each other like idiots when you could be happy?" She had a point, but the thought of actually doing something about my feelings made my stomach twist with anxiety. I'd been hurt before. I'd put myself out there with guys who seemed interested only to discover they wanted something casual, something that didn't require emotional investment. Dylan felt different. Dylan felt important. The thought of losing him hurt worse than never having him. I barely slept that night. By the time I got to the hospital for my Thursday shift, I was running on nervous energy and bad coffee. Dylan was already in the break room when I arrived, and he looked up when I walked in with a smile that made my heart stutter. "Hey, you look tired." "Couldn't sleep," I admitted, setting down my bag. "Everything okay?" I almost said yes. Almost fell back on the safe answer, the one that kept everything comfortable and unchanged. But Jenna's words kept echoing in my head. What if you're both sitting around pining for each other like idiots when you could be happy? "Can I ask you something?" The words came out before I could stop them. Dylan's expression shifted, became more alert. "Of course. That day in the cafeteria, when you gave me those napkins, did you—" I paused, trying to find the right words. "Did you remember me? Before we got partnered, I mean. Did you think about that moment?" He was quiet for so long I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Then he said, "Yeah, I remembered you." "Why?" "Because you smiled at me even though you were clearly having an awful day. Because your eyes are this incredible colour, like honey in sunlight, and I couldn't stop thinking about them. Because I went back to that cafeteria at the same time for weeks hoping I'd see you again, but I never did." He took a breath. "Because I don't usually notice people the way I noticed you." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. "Dylan, I know we're partners, I know that complicates things, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this." He gestured between us. "Whatever this is." "I feel it too," I said, the words rushing out. "I've been feeling it for weeks, maybe since the beginning. I didn't know if you—" I trailed off, suddenly overwhelmed. Dylan stood up and crossed the small space between us. We were close now, closer than we'd ever been except in the chaos of emergency calls. I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and then his hand was cupping my jaw, and his lips were on mine, and everything else disappeared. He kissed me soft and careful, like I was something precious, and I kissed him back with all the longing I'd been holding in. His other hand found my waist, pulling me closer, and I let myself sink into it, into him, into this moment I'd been dreaming about without admitting it. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dylan rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he murmured. "Me too." "What do we do now?" It was a good question. We were still work partners. We'd still have to be professional during shifts. But standing there with his hands on me, with the taste of him still on my lips, I couldn't bring myself to care about the complications. "Now we figure it out," I said. "Together." Our first real date happened 3 days later. Dylan picked me up at 7, looking unfairly handsome in dark jeans and a sweater, that made me want to run my hands all over him. We went to this small Italian place he loved, tucked away in a neighbourhood I'd never explored, and talked for hours. Without the pressure of work, without the constant interruptions of hospital life, we could just be. Two people getting to know each other, two people falling, because I was falling. Had been falling maybe since that first moment in the cafeteria, but now I could admit it, could lean into it without fear. Dylan told me about his failed relationships, about guys who didn't understand why he cared so much about his work, who wanted him to be less intense, less emotional. I told him about my own heartbreaks, about learning to guard myself, about being afraid to want something real. I want something real, Dylan said, reaching across the table to take my hand. With you, if you want that too. I do, I really do. We took it slow at work, professional during shifts, though sometimes I'd catch Dylan looking at me with this soft expression that made me feel warm all over. We were careful not to let our relationship affect our performance, but if anything, we worked better together. The trust we'd built as partners deepened into something more profound. Outside of work, we carved out time for each other, coffee dates before early shifts, dinner at each other's apartments, long walks where we'd talk about everything and nothing. Dylan introduced me to more classical music, creating playlists for different moods. I taught him to cook my grandmother's enchilada recipe, laughing as he struggled with the proper tortilla rolling technique. The physical intimacy built gradually, kisses that grew deeper and more urgent, his hands learning the map of my body. Long nights tangled together in his bed or mine, discovering what made each other gasp and sigh and forget our own names. Sex with Dylan wasn't just physical, it was emotional, vulnerable, a different kind of trust. Afterward, we'd lie wrapped around each other, and he'd hum Claire de Lune until I fell asleep. 3 months in, Dylan met Jenna. I was nervous about it, wanting my best friend and my boyfriend to like each other, but I shouldn't have worried. Jenna took one look at how Dylan looked at me and pulled me aside. Okay, I approve. He's clearly crazy about you. You think? Mason, that man looks at you like you hung the moon. Don't screw this up. I didn't plan to. For the first time in my life, I felt like I'd found something I wanted to fight for. Someone who understood the demanding nature of my work because he lived it too. Someone who didn't mind 3 a.m. phone calls when I needed to talk after a bad shift. Someone who made me laugh and challenged me and held me when I needed holding. We had our first fight about 2 months after that. Something stupid about scheduling and Dylan taking an extra shift without telling me, leaving me worried when he didn't answer his phone. It escalated, both of us tired and stressed, saying things we didn't mean. I left his apartment angry, convinced I'd been right to guard my heart, that this proved relationships were too hard. Dylan showed up at my door 2 hours later. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I should have told you about the shift. I wasn't thinking. I overreacted, I admitted. I was scared, and I turned it into anger. Can I come in? We talked it through. Really talked. Not just apologising, but discussing why we'd both reacted the way we had. Dylan admitted he sometimes struggled with feeling suffocated in relationships, with people trying to control his choices. I confessed my fear of abandonment, of being left without explanation. We promised to communicate better, to remember we were on the same team. I'm not going anywhere, Dylan said, pulling me close, as you're stuck with me. Good, because I'm not letting you go. 6 months into our relationship, Dylan's mom came to visit. I was terrified. This was the woman who'd raised him, who he talked to every week, who he clearly adored. What if she didn't like me? What if she thought I wasn't good enough for her son? She was warm and funny and immediately put me at ease. Over dinner, she told embarrassing stories about Dylan's childhood, and he groaned and blushed while I laughed. When she hugged me goodbye, she whispered, "Thank you for making my son so happy." My own parents met Dylan a month later when we flew to Texas for my sister's wedding. I'd warned Dylan that my dad could be gruff, that my mum would probably cry, that my extended family would have questions. But Dylan handled it all with grace, charming my mother, talking football with my dad, dancing with my grandmother at the reception. Your family's great, he said that night in our hotel room. They love you, I could tell. Yeah? He looked pleased, almost shy. Yeah, almost as much as I do. The words slipped out without planning. We'd been skirting around them for weeks, both of us feeling it, but neither brave enough to say it first. Dylan's eyes widened. You love me? I do. I love you. I probably have for a while now. His smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. I love you too. God, Mason, I love you so much. He kissed me then, deep and sweet and full of promise, and I thought about that moment in the cafeteria, about spilled coffee and classical music and a stranger's kindness, about how the smallest moments can change everything, about how the universe sometimes gives you exactly what you need in the most unexpected way. A year after we met, Dylan and I moved in together. A small apartment halfway between the hospital and our favourite coffee shop, with big windows that let in morning light and enough space for both our stuff. The first night there, after we'd unpacked most of the boxes, we sat on our couch eating takeout and Dylan pulled out his phone. I made you something, he said, looking almost nervous. He pressed play and Claire de Lune filled the room, but not the version I knew. This was Dylan, playing piano, recorded in his mother's living room during our last visit. His own interpretation of the song that had become ours. I listened with tears in my eyes, overwhelmed by the beauty of it, by the thoughtfulness of this gift. When did you do this? Last month, when you went to the store with my mum. I wanted you to have a version that was just ours. I set down my food and kissed him, trying to pour everything I felt into it. Gratitude and love and the bone-deep certainty that this was it. This was the person I wanted to build a life with. Thank you, I whispered against his lips, for everything, for seeing me that day, for remembering, for taking a chance. Always, Dylan said, echoing his words from that night in the stairwell. I'll always take a chance on you. We're still at the same hospital, still working overnight shifts as partners sometimes. We still respond to codes and fight to save lives and hold each other when we lose the battle. But now we come home to each other. Now I get to fall asleep next to him every night and wake up to his face every morning. Now when he hums Claire de Lune while making coffee, I can walk up behind him and wrap my arms around his waist and press a kiss to the back of his neck. People ask me sometimes if I believe in fate, in soulmates, in the idea that some people are meant to find each other. I used to say no. I used to think love was just timing and compatibility and luck. But then Dylan walked into that cafeteria humming a piece of classical music, and 6 months later walked into my life humming the same song, and I don't know what else to call that except meant to be. Last week, during one of our shifts, a new nurse asked how Dylan and I worked together so seamlessly. Before I could answer, Dylan smiled and said, "We just listen to each other. Pay attention to the small things. That's all any partnership really needs." He caught my eye as he said it, and I knew he was thinking about the same thing I was, about coffee-stained scrubs and borrowed napkins, about moonlight captured in music, about all the small things that added up to everything. This is my life now. This beautiful, unexpected, sometimes messy life, with the man who saw me on my worst day and decided I was worth remembering, who hummed the song that was playing when we met and made it ours, who taught me that love doesn't have to be complicated or dramatic to be real. Sometimes it's just two people choosing each other over and over in 1,000 small ways. Sometimes it's just a melody that reminds you of moonlight, of beauty and melancholy existing together, of the moment everything changed. Sometimes it's just that simple and that profound.